welcome to Vantage this week, a show where we recap the highlights of the week gone by. In West Asia, tensions are running high. Israel and Lebanon are firing missiles at each other. We're talking hundreds of rockets and hundreds of casualties. Israel says strikes will intensify. Is an all-out war on the cards? And speaking of war, Russian President Vladimir Putin is making nuclear threats. He says that if Russia is attacked, it will respond with nukes. Meanwhile, Anura Kumara Dissanayake, or AKD, is the new president of Sri Lanka. What are his policies and how will they affect India? We'll discuss that and tell you why the Sahara Desert is turning green. All this and more lined up. Let's get started.
هاي تحت البيت عنا، هاي تحت البيت عنا يا جماعة.
The IDF has warned you to get out of harm's way.
I've been briefed on the latest developments in Israel and Lebanon.
There's more escalation in West Asia. Israel and Hezbollah are exchanging fire. We're talking hundreds of rockets, dozens of missiles, and hundreds of casualties. It's the most dangerous flare-up in nearly 20 years. Israel is doing most of the damage. They're pounding Lebanon with missiles and rockets. Some 1,600 Hezbollah sites have been hit. And casualties? 558 deaths so far. That includes 50 children and 94 women. Among the rest, it's not clear how many were Hezbollah fighters, so chances are Israel killed a lot of civilians. It's the highest death toll since Lebanon's civil war.
هاي تحت البيت عنا، هاي تحت البيت عنا يا جماعة.
هاي هلا.
And it's not over yet. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has released a statement. He's asking Lebanese people to get out of harm's way. The plan is to keep striking Hezbollah targets, to take out their launch sites.
To defend our people against Hezbollah strikes, we must take out those weapons. Now, starting this morning, the IDF has warned you to get out of harm's way. I urge you, take this warning seriously. Don't let Hezbollah endanger your lives and the lives of your loved ones. Don't let Hezbollah endanger Lebanon. Please, get out of harm's way now.
Netanyahu says, get out of harm's way. And go where? Hezbollah is embedded into Lebanese society. They're literally everywhere, in cities, in villages, in remote hills, everywhere. So where does Netanyahu want these people to go? He says the plan is to deter Hezbollah, to remain ahead of the threat. But frankly, Netanyahu is the bigger threat at the moment. He is single-handedly plunging the region into a wider war because Hezbollah is not sitting around. They're striking back. They have fired around 200 rockets at Israel. Most of them were intercepted by the Iron Dome system. And casualties? Just 2 injured in Israel. Hezbollah is the rogue group here, but they have shown surprising restraint. In fact, there is little appetite for war in Lebanon. Then why is Netanyahu poking them? Well, maybe for politics. These attacks have increased his popularity. After the Hamas attack last year, most Israelis wanted Netanyahu out, but now his Likud party is leading national polls. The longer the fighting continues, the stronger he becomes. And what is the world doing about it? Israel's allies have called for restraint. So have China and the United Nations. But none of them seem to have an effect on Netanyahu, not even the United States of America.
The conflict along the blue line has gone on for way too long, far too long, and it needs to get to a resolution quickly. And so we're going to continue to do that, continue to have those diplomatic conversations.
中方高度关注
China opposes any violation of Lebanon's sovereignty and security and opposes and condemns any action that harms innocent civilians.
中方反对侵犯
The message to the parties that are firing at each other across the blue line, to all the parties involved in this conflict, is step back from the brink. Stop the escalation.
The UN General Assembly has convened in the backdrop of these tensions, not just in West Asia, but also Ukraine. So war is the talk of the town. Prime Minister Modi was also in New York yesterday, and he met two key players of these wars. First was Mahmoud Abbas, the seemingly forever president of Palestine, and then Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. Both were significant meetings. Yes, Putin and Netanyahu are not attending the United Nations, so it's impossible to meet them in New York. Yet, it sends a political message, these meetings, they send a political message. Modi met Abbas amid the escalation in West Asia. He called for a ceasefire in Gaza. He also reiterated India's demand for a two-state solution. Same with Zelensky. This was Modi's third meeting with him in the last 4 months. He called for a peaceful resolution of the war. Now remember, both Israel and Russia are key partners of India, two of the biggest arms suppliers as well. Yet Prime Minister Modi met their chief rivals. What does that tell you? A, the continued death and destruction has made India recalibrate its policy. As an aspiring world leader, you cannot remain silent. And B, India is keeping its options open. And a big reason for that is China. Beijing has deepened its cooperation with Moscow. They're also lobbying for their peace plan. It's a broad and vague proposal, but Putin has agreed to support it, China's proposal. So since Russia is cozying up to China, India is engaging the other side, sort of like covering all bases. It's the same thinking in Gaza. China has become a leading critic of Israel's actions. As a result, they have garnered goodwill in West Asia, whether it's in Iran or Saudi Arabia or the UAE. China even managed to strike a truce between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, something that was considered impossible. So India had to act. New Delhi has not taken sides in these wars. But global perception is different, and you can thank Western media for that. They made it seem like India was tacitly backing Russia and Israel. But with these meetings, Prime Minister Modi has made one thing clear: India is not supporting anyone's war, nor should anyone take India for granted, even if it's a long-time partner or friend. West Asia remains on the edge. It sounds like a cliche given how many times we've said this over the past few months, but that doesn't take away from the severity of the situation. A major escalation appears more likely now than it did in the past 1 year. Today, Hezbollah tried to target the Mossad. That's Israel's intelligence agency. Hezbollah fired a ballistic missile towards Tel Aviv. Sirens rang across the city. Take a look at this. The missile was intercepted before it could cause any harm, but it wasn't the only one that was fired. There's been a series of attacks in the north too, near the Israel-Lebanon border. Cross-border attacks are intensifying there. Israel has launched a major bombing operation with large-scale aerial attacks inside Lebanon. Israel dispatched 250 jets. They dropped at least 2,000 munitions on 1,600 targets in Lebanon. 1,600 targets. These attacks were carried out in 4 waves. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says they've struck Hezbollah infrastructure, including targets in the Lebanese capital, Beirut. South Beirut to be precise, which is a Hezbollah stronghold. One of its commanders was killed in the strikes. Hezbollah confirmed the death today of one of their commanders. Israel claims that they've eliminated 2 more Hezbollah commanders. All in all, more than 500 people have died and over 1,800 are injured. Many of these are believed to be civilians. In fact, they seem to have suffered the maximum damage in these attacks. Look at these pictures. These were residential areas. These attacks from Israel have triggered a mass exodus in Lebanon. One report says more than 100,000 people have been displaced so far. Again, these are civilians, mostly those who had homes near the Israeli border.
Before this time, there were no strikes taking place in our hometown. We used to hear sounds of strikes in our surroundings. The day before yesterday, strikes started getting closer and Israeli planes were in the sky. For sure, we were scared bit by bit. It reached the fields outside the village and inside it. Of course, we could not stay. Everyone is scared. We carried ourselves, packed our clothes, and we left.
A new phase of war has begun. Israel's defense minister made this statement last week. In fact, Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah used the same words, a new phase of war. And that's what it is, really. Though it's not clear how far Israel plans to take it. Will Netanyahu launch a ground offensive in Lebanon? Israeli media says the IDF is preparing for one. The IDF is the Israeli Defense Force. Reports say that they had a meeting attended by Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and a team of soldiers. Apparently, these are the soldiers who are preparing for the ground offensive. Now, Israel has not confirmed this report, but more importantly, they haven't denied it. So a ground offensive is not off the table. And that makes the situation even more serious. On the other side, Hezbollah is launching retaliatory attacks. It continues to fire missiles into Israel.
During the past few hours, Safed and its periphery a heavy barrage of tens of items. Unfortunately, we had a direct hit to one of the homes in one of the neighborhoods of the city of Safed. Luckily, the family is currently staying out of the country, so this event caused no casualties. Over the past 24 hours, we have seen hits in houses where the residents stayed in safe areas, especially safe rooms, and were spared.
The global community is ringing alarm bells. Several world leaders are in New York to attend the United Nations General Assembly. Antonio Guterres has issued a strong statement. He is the Secretary General of the UN. He said tensions in West Asia have become, and I'm quoting, a non-stop nightmare, which could take the entire region down, and Lebanon could become another Gaza.
Look no further than Lebanon. We should all be alarmed by the escalation. Lebanon is at the brink. The people of Lebanon, the people of Israel, and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza.
That was a powerful statement, but the repeated appeals also expose his limitations. The United Nations has no teeth. It cannot enforce a ceasefire in West Asia or anywhere else for that matter. So all Guterres can do is make appeals for de-escalation. The need of the hour is to break this cycle of violence, because if Israel attacks Lebanon on the ground, it will force the hand of the other side, including players like Iran. Iran, as you would know, is the key sponsor of Hezbollah. It funds this organization. It trains its fighters. For the moment, Iran is calling for a ceasefire. But if Israel launches a ground offensive, it will leave Iran with no choice, really. Tehran will have to respond in kind.
Naturally blind Israeli state terrorism over the past few days in Lebanon, followed by a massive aggression with thousands of victims, cannot go unanswered. The responsibility for all consequences will be borne by those governments who have thwarted all global efforts to end this horrific catastrophe and have the audacity to call themselves champions of human rights.
Iran could be gearing up for an escalation. Reports say it has sought help from Russia. The two sides held secret talks. Iran wants cruise missiles from Russia. It wants to ship these missiles to the Houthis in Yemen. The Houthis are another proxy group of Tehran. So if Israel escalates, Iran could ask the Houthis to mobilize, possibly in the Red Sea. Whichever way you look at it, the picture looks alarming. West Asia is on the edge of a precipice.
I didn't intend to come here this year. My country is at war, fighting for its life. We will fight until we achieve victory, total victory. There is no substitute for it. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach, and that's true of the entire Middle East.
In West Asia, Israel is opening another war front. It is bombing Lebanon. The target is Hezbollah, but paying the price again are ordinary people. Since Monday, 700 people have been killed. 30,000 have crossed over to Syria. They're trying to escape another war. And where is Benjamin Netanyahu? The Israeli Prime Minister is thousands of kilometers away. He is in New York addressing the United Nations General Assembly.
I didn't intend to come here this year. My country is at war, fighting for its life. But after I heard the lies and slanders leveled at my country by many of the speakers at this podium, I decided to come here and set the record straight.
Netanyahu is trying to set the record straight. After all, it's his first speech at the UNGA since the war began last October. So he came armed with evidence, maps. They are a Netanyahu staple at the United Nations General Assembly, but this time he had two of them, a map of blessing and a map of curse. The blessing map is the one that he showed last year. It shows the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. The curse map is the new one, and it's linked to Iran. It shows Iranian proxies in the region. And of course, it came with a warning.
I have a message for the tyrants of Tehran. If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach. And that's true of the entire Middle East.
The Israeli Prime Minister did not stop there. He stressed on his war goals, bringing all hostages back, ending Hamas, and demilitarizing Gaza.
The reason is simple. Because if Hamas stays in power, it will regroup, rearm, and attack Israel again and again and again, as it is vowed to do. So Hamas has got to go.
Netanyahu remains confident that Israel is winning this war. While the speech got some cheers, not everyone was pleased. Several delegations walked out right before he took the podium.
Ladies and gentlemen, order. Order, please.
That's never bothered Netanyahu, though. And he made it clear again with his speech today that this war will continue. Ceasefire is not on Israel's mind. It has been striking Lebanon since Monday. The world called for restraint, but the appeals fell on deaf ears. So on Wednesday, the US and France came up with a proposal, a 21-day ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel. Basically, a temporary pause in fighting. 12 countries backed this proposal, and Washington seemed truly excited. It was like they finally had made a breakthrough. The popular assumption was that Israel had agreed to it, else why would America announce it? Reports say behind the scenes, things were looking positive. Israel and Hezbollah had seen this proposal. In fact, Israel was on board. There was a sort of an understanding. America was apparently led to believe that both parties would sign it, which is why they went public with it. Sounds like good diplomacy behind the scenes, but there was one problem. Netanyahu did not get the memo, or maybe he did, and he chose to ignore it, because hours after the ceasefire announcement, the Israeli Prime Minister denounced it. He called ceasefire reports incorrect. He said Israel will continue to fight with full force.
My policy, our policy is clear. We are continuing to hit Hezbollah with full force, and we will not stop until we achieve all our goals. First and foremost, returning the residents of the North safely to their homes.
Of course, Washington is not happy with this. America is Israel's biggest ally. They're sending them weapons. They're vetoing UN resolutions. They're going all out for Israel. So they expected Israel to return the favor. They had brought allies on board. that pitched for peace. The indication was that Israel would agree.
That statement we worked on last night wasn't just drawn up in a vacuum. It was done after careful consultation, not only with the countries that signed on to it, but Israel itself. And we had every reason to believe that in the drafting of it and in the delivery of it, that the Israelis were fully informed and fully aware of every word in it.
Basically, Netanyahu did a U-turn, and he may have a reason for it. Since October 7th last year, Netanyahu's approval ratings have been falling. He's not popular at all at home. But that changed this week. The pager blast, followed by the attacks in Lebanon, have boosted his ratings. If elections were to be held today in Israel, his Likud party would lead. So Netanyahu is suddenly popular again, and his far-right government wants this war. I guess the Israeli Prime Minister chose domestic support over international praise. But what does this mean for West Asia? As we speak, the attacks on Lebanon continue. Multiple explosions were heard in Beirut. Israel says the strikes will intensify. It is sending troops to the northern border. They will be stationed there, possibly for a ground invasion. So right now, peace is on the back burner. All signs point to more escalation and an all-out war. It's the last thing West Asia needs.
Обновленной редакции. Хорошо.
Will Vladimir Putin go nuclear? The Russian president is making fresh threats. Today he sent another warning to the West. Putin says if Russia is attacked, it reserves the right to respond with nuclear weapons. Listen to this.
We reserve the right to use nuclear weapons in the event of aggression against Russia and Belarus as a member of the Union State. All these issues have been agreed upon with the Belarusian side, with the president of Belarus, including if the enemy, using conventional weapons, creates a critical threat to our sovereignty.
Putin has made such threats before. So what's the big deal about this one? Why is it making headlines? Because Putin is redefining Russia's red lines. He has revised the country's nuclear doctrine for the second time in 4 years, and it sends a clear message to Ukraine and its Western backers. If Russia is attacked by any conventional weapon, if it detects any incoming attack, whether it's missiles, drones or aircraft, Russia could respond with nuclear weapons. That's the message in a nutshell.
We will consider such a possibility as soon as we receive reliable information about a massive launch of aerospace attack means and their crossing of our state border, meaning strategic or tactical aircraft, cruise missiles, drones, hypersonic missiles, and other aircraft.
You may have heard of the no first use policy with respect to nuclear weapons. It basically means that you won't fire nuclear weapons first. No first use. You'll only resort to nukes when you come under a nuclear attack yourself. India follows this policy. A lot of countries do, but Russia is evidently junking it. It says it will use nuclear weapons in the event of any attack, nuclear or conventional. The question is why? Why is Putin issuing this threat now? Well, he's responding to Ukraine's attacks inside Russia. The incursion in Kursk. In August, Ukrainian troops captured parts of the region, the Kursk region, and they now claim to control territory here along with some 100 Russian settlements. They're in Ukrainian control. Now, this offensive has emboldened Zelensky. He wants to launch a bigger offensive. He's been pushing his Western partners to support his plans. Zelensky wants to use Western missiles in this operation, like the British-made Storm Shadow missile and the American ATACMS system. Both are long-range missiles. They can be used to strike deep inside Russia. The West is yet to make up its mind on letting Ukraine use these weapons. But Putin seems to be preempting the threat. So if Ukraine hits Russia with a missile or any other long-range weapon, he says he might retaliate with a nuclear attack. That is the warning from Vladimir Putin. And Russian mouthpieces have been amplifying it. For the past few weeks, they've been discussing war scenarios. Where could Russia deploy its nukes? How would it showcase its capabilities? And one of the options being discussed is this. For Russia to build replicas of Western cities like London and Washington, D.C., these would feature mock-ups of famous landmarks like the Buckingham Palace, the Big Ben and the White House. Then they would be destroyed by nukes. An expert from a Russian think tank gave this idea. He made these comments on Russian TV. So the nuclear rhetoric is getting louder. And Zelensky is raising an alarm. He says there will be an escalation from Russia and that Putin is gearing up to strike Ukraine's energy infrastructure, specifically its 4 nuclear plants.
Now Putin does seem to be planning attacks on our nuclear power plants and their infrastructure. Any missile or drone strike, any critical incident in the energy system could lead to a nuclear disaster.
Zelensky, as you can see, is in the U.S. He addressed the United Nations General Assembly yesterday. He also met U.S. President Joe Biden. He is using this trip to build support for a victory plan, the details of which remain scarce, but it's basically a push for more military support and more security guarantees. Joe Biden has just a few months left in office. So Zelensky is perhaps hoping to extract as much as he can from the Americans. Will Biden support his victory plan? We don't know that yet. But Zelensky is not leaving the U.S. empty-handed. He is getting more military aid worth $8 billion this time. This includes more weapons and military equipment. And this should be enough to sustain Ukraine at least till the end of Biden's term. But after that, after Biden's term in office, Ukraine's fate looks uncertain. If Kamala Harris wins, Zelensky can hope for some continuity. If Donald Trump wins, all bets are off. So Zelensky is trying to Trump-proof Ukraine. How? By winning more friends. And his hopes rest on India, among others. A new report came out yesterday. It said that Ukraine is counting on India's help to broker peace with Russia. The story refers to Prime Minister Modi's recent engagements with Zelensky. They've met at least thrice in 4 months. First at the G7 in Italy in the month of June. Then in August when Modi traveled to Kiev. And then earlier this week when they met in New York. They discussed a potential peace deal. And apparently this was Prime Minister Modi's advice to Zelensky. If he wants the war to end, he should be open to compromise. That's what Modi said to have told Zelensky. Be open to a compromise. The report does not spell out what that compromise could look like. Remember, India has refused to support any peace deal which involves Ukraine giving up its territory. And this has been Ukraine's position too, not conceding land to Russia. Perhaps that's why Ukraine sees India as one of the few reliable mediators in the conflict. But would Russia agree to this? Is it ready to negotiate on these terms? Putin's nuclear rhetoric does not inspire confidence. In the Pacific, another conflict is building up. A Russian airplane violated Japan's airspace. It was a first since 2019. Tokyo issued multiple warnings. The Russian plane paid no heed. So Japan did the unprecedented. It fired warning flares at the military plane from Russia. This is the first time Japan's Air Force has fired flares since 1958. The first since 1958. So this was an extreme step for them. But it also shows you that Tokyo has had enough. In the last 1 year, Japan has scrambled jets 669 times. In the last 1 month, there have been repeated drills and incursions by Chinese and Russian militaries, all of which has left Japan alarmed. So why are Moscow and Beijing testing Tokyo's limits? Our next report tells you.
It was around 1 p.m. local time. A Russian Il-38 patrol plane entered the Japanese airspace above Raebun Islands. Tokyo immediately scrambled its jets. It warned the Russian plane. The plane ignored Japan's warnings. It violated Japan's airspace 3 times. On the 3rd time, Japan used flares, a first since 1958. Tokyo has since defended its action, calling it a legitimate response. The defense minister says Japan issued warnings to the Russian plane, but it didn't respond. It was only after multiple warnings that Tokyo used flares. Japan has lodged an extremely stern protest with Moscow.
The airspace violation is extremely regrettable, and today, we strongly protested to the Russian government through diplomatic channels. and urged them to prevent recurrence of such an incident.
Russia is yet to respond. This is the first incursion by a Russian aircraft since 2019. Earlier this month, a Russian aircraft did fly around the area. Back then as well, Japan scrambled its jets. But the Tu-142 plane did not enter Japanese airspace. Instead, it flew over these islands. Japan calls them the Northern Territories. Russia calls them the Kurils. These are a string of volcanic islands, and they're disputed. Soviet troops invaded them in the final days of World War II. Moscow considers them a part of its territory. Tokyo says it's illegally occupied by Russia. The islands are at the heart of a long feud between the two countries ever since the end of World War II. In fact, it prevented them from signing a World War II peace treaty formally. But this incursion isn't just about these islands, it has to do with another neighbor, China. Recently, Russia and China held joint drills in the Sea of Japan. It was the largest of its kind in 3 decades. Just a day ahead of the incursion, Chinese and Russian warships sailed around the Japanese northern coast. Japan says it has scrambled its jets 669 times between April 2023 and March 2024. 70% was against Chinese military aircraft, but it did not include incursions, and there have been a few of them. In August, a Chinese military aircraft entered Japan's airspace. Tokyo called it a serious violation of its sovereignty. And now there's another incursion, this time by Russia. The timing is significant. On Saturday, the Quad met in Delaware. The statement didn't mention China by name, but the US president was caught in a hot mic moment. He said Beijing was testing the group in the region. Then on Monday, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida met Ukrainian President Zelensky. Japan has long supported Kyiv in the war. This meeting was to further extend cooperation. So the sheer increase in the number of incursions and drills isn't just a coincidence. It's a message to Japan. Both Moscow and Beijing may have different reasons, but their goal is similar, to deter Tokyo in the region. But their actions could have the opposite effect. For decades, Japan has been a pacifist nation. It's enshrined in their constitution. But Tokyo seems to be leaving that behind. The government is on its biggest military spending spree in decades. Tokyo wants to expand its armed forces. And these incursions are likely to push Japan further in that direction.
Our next story involves Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Over the last few days, Islamabad has ramped up praise for Riyadh. Saudi Arabia celebrated its National Day on Monday, and like a bunch of distant, freeloading relatives, Pakistan's politicians were ready to party. Their president, Asif Ali Zardari, went to the Saudi embassy along with a bunch of ministers, diplomats and, of course, military officers. Zardari was soon singing praises, lauding the vision of the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and promising to further strengthen Saudi-Pakistan bilateral ties. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif could not be there in person, but he sent a video message. And he waxed eloquent about Saudi's global leadership role. Sharif also thanked Riyadh for all the financial help. Pakistan is due to get another tranche of pocket money from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and it wouldn't have been possible without Saudi assistance. We don't know the details yet, but Islamabad was hoping for over $1 billion from Riyadh recently, so the kingdom probably opened its checkbook again, which explains the fresh bout of Pakistani sycophancy. But there's also another reason for Pakistan to flatter Saudi Arabia. The kingdom has been annoyed lately because of a problem that just refuses to go away: the issue of Pakistani beggars. For years now, some Pakistani people have been making their way to Saudi Arabia purportedly to make a pilgrimage to the Islamic holy sites of Mecca and Medina. But some Pakistani people get a pilgrimage visa, land in Saudi Arabia and proceed to beg, sometimes right outside the holy sites. And this has been a problem for years. Some shocking details had emerged last September. Apparently, 90% of the beggars arrested in foreign countries were Pakistani, 90%. This is in countries like Iran, Iraq, and the UAE, and of course, Saudi Arabia. And it's not just the beggars. There are Pakistani pickpockets too, sometimes right outside the Grand Mosque in Mecca. There has been some misreporting around this issue too. Some publications said that begging remittances amounted to $42 billion or 12% of Pakistan's GDP. That number is absurd and it's not true. But a lot of people believed it because the problem of Pakistani beggars is so widespread. Saudi Arabia has raised this issue time and again, as recently as last month in fact. The Saudi ambassador met with Pakistan's Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi, and Naqvi promised to take, and I'm quoting, robust action. He said all the right things about how Pakistan's Federal Investigation Agency was on the case, that they would target Pakistan's beggar trafficking mafia. And what was the result of all that talk? Pakistan managed to arrest 11 people. Their investigation agency picked up 11 suspicious-looking pilgrims at the Karachi airport, and this was days after the meeting with the Saudi ambassador. The arrest was splashed all over the news, and it seems Islamabad thought that was that, job done. But it wasn't. It did not make much of a dent because Riyadh is raising the same issue again. This time they've sent a letter to Pakistan's Ministry of Religious Affairs, warning of dire consequences. Riyadh said that it could be forced to take action and restrict pilgrimage visas for people from Pakistan. That could lead to collateral damage affecting the genuine pilgrims as well. But it seems that Riyadh is running out of patience and won't tolerate it much longer, no matter how much Zardari and Sharif fawn over the kingdom.
ශ්‍රී ලංකා ජනතාවට පක්ෂපාත වන බවද මාගේ උපරිම ශක්ති ප්‍රමාණයෙන් ශ්‍රී ලංකා ප්‍රජාතාන්ත්‍රික සමාජවාදී ජනරජයේ ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ දේශය තුළ වෙනම රජයක් පිහිටුවීමට කෙලින්ම හෝ අන්‍යාකාරයෙන් ශ්‍රී ලංකාව තුළදී හෝ දේශනා කිරීම කරන බවද ගෞරව බහුමාන්‍ය යුක්තව ප්‍රකාශ කොට තිබෙනවා.
Anurag Kumara Dissanayake. He's the new president of Sri Lanka. But most Sri Lankans don't call him that. For supporters and critics, he is AKD. And he's got many labels: Marxist, left-leaning, ethno-nationalist, anti-India. I could go on and on. But tonight, we're looking at the leader underneath the labels. Who is AKD? What are his policies? How will they affect Sri Lanka? And is his win a setback for India? First, the results. AKD won 42% of the votes in the first round. At second place was Sajid Premadasa, who won 32% of the votes. And third was Ranil Wickremesinghe with 17%. Since no one crossed the 50% mark, a second round of counting was done. For the first time in Sri Lanka's history, they had never had a second round before this one. And this time, the second choice votes were counted. Basically, voters can state their first, second and third preferences. Most don't do it. But this time, those second preference votes were the game changers. That's how AKD won. He was sworn in today in Colombo. He admitted that he cannot magically fix the economy, but he promised to do everything he can.
We are inheriting a nation in a deep crisis. This crisis cannot be overcome by a government, a political party, or an individual alone. I am not a conjurer or a magician. I am a common citizen. I have strengths and limitations, things I know and things I don't. However, my priority is to identify capabilities, acquire the knowledge I lack, and make informed decisions to lead this country.
AKD isn't your typical Sri Lankan leader. He's not a political dynast. His father was not a president or prime minister. He grew up in central rural Sri Lanka. In college, he was introduced to Marxism, and that's when he joined the JVP, the Janata Vimukti Peramuna, a leftist party in Sri Lanka. It split away from the country's Communist Party. Now, the JVP has a violent past. They tried to topple the Sri Lankan government twice, once in 1971 and then again in 1987. Both times there was a bloodbath. It led to the death of nearly 80,000 people. Of course, AKD wasn't around then. He joined a different JVP, one that was transitioning from violence to democracy. He became a member of parliament in the year 2000. He began leading the JVP in 2014. He contested the presidential election for the first time in 2019. The JVP has mostly remained on the fringes, but the 2022 debt crisis boosted them. Sri Lankans rejected the so-called mainstream politicians. They were fed up with corruption, mismanagement and dynastic politics, and that's what AKD tapped into. He pitched himself as a political outsider. He did not use Marxist tropes of class struggles. Instead, he talked about corruption and taxes, things that ordinary people would understand and relate with. And clearly the strategy worked. But his challenge is not over yet. AKD must form a functioning government. He must appoint ministers from the parliament. Just one problem though. His party has just 3 MPs, including him. So how can AKD form a government? Well, he's expected to call for a snap parliamentary election. Until then, he can appoint a caretaker cabinet. So expect back-to-back elections in Sri Lanka. Now we come to the policy. AKD is a 21st century Marxist. He supports foreign trade and investments. In fact, he spoke about it today. He said Sri Lanka cannot live in isolation.
Our country needs international support. Regardless of the power divisions in the world, we intend to work with other nations to benefit our country. We are not a nation that should be isolated, but one that must move forward collectively with others.
Nonetheless, questions remain, especially on the IMF bailout. Sri Lanka negotiated a $2.9 billion deal in 2023. As part of it, some austerity measures have been introduced, like higher taxes and lower subsidies. AKD says that he will renegotiate this deal. As president, he can tweak some parts of it, but that could delay the bailout funds. And a lot of experts are worried about that. If the new president is not careful, he could derail the current progress. Which brings us to the geopolitics. India and China were keenly watching this election. Ideologically, AKD is close to China, plus his party has an anti-India past. They opposed India's peacekeeping deployments in Sri Lanka, even targeted Indian troops and businesses. Does AKD share that animosity? Well, not publicly. After his victory, the Indian High Commissioner met AKD. He was the first foreign diplomat to do so. Prime Minister Modi also congratulated him. He said Sri Lanka has a special place in India's policy. AKD thanked Modi for his wishes. He promised to strengthen India-Sri Lanka ties too. Well, China also congratulated him. President Xi Jinping apparently sent a message to the new president. The question is, should India be worried about him? It's no secret that AKD was not India's favorite. New Delhi would have liked Wickremesinghe back or Premadasa to win, but it was prepared for all scenarios. In February, New Delhi hosted AKD. Both Foreign Minister Jaishankar and National Security Advisor Ajit Doval met him, sort of like an icebreaker. NSA Doval also travelled to Colombo last month. Again, he met AKD. So this result isn't a surprise for New Delhi. Not like the Maldives or Bangladesh. This time, India was prepared for it. As for the policies, it's a waiting game. No one really knows what AKD's foreign policy will look like. Consider the Chinese spy ship voyages. As a leftist, will he see them as imperialistic moves? Or will he give a fellow leftist country a pass? These are questions only time will answer. Now let's turn to Japan. The land of the rising sun will soon be waking up to a new prime minister. They will soon be led by this man, Shigeru Ishiba.
I am Shigeru Ishiba, the 28th Liberal Democratic Party's leader. Let's believe the people of Japan. With courage and faith, let's speak the truth. Let's make Japan, once again, a country where people can live and smile. Shigeru Ishiba will put all of his heart and soul into making Japan a safe and secure country. Thank you for your support.
Ishiba will take charge as Prime Minister on Tuesday, taking over from Fumio Kishida. Now, this is not exactly a regime change. Both men are part of the same party, Japan's Liberal Democratic Party. It's the same party that has led the country for most of the last century. General elections aren't due in Japan for another year, but it's still getting a new prime minister. Why? Because the LDP, the ruling party, was in crisis. The outgoing prime minister, Fumio Kishida, was unpopular. His reputation had taken multiple hits because of a number of scandals. Some LDP leaders were seen as too close to a dubious church. The scandal broke out after the assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Then there was a corruption scandal, again involving LDP lawmakers. Add to this a cost of living crisis in Japan, rising inflation and economic stagnation. You can see why the ruling party was facing flack. Kishida effectively became the fall guy, and he stepped down from his role as party leader, paving the way for the rise of Shigeru Ishiba. Ishiba is 67 years old. He has been an MP since 1986. He has served as Japan's defense minister, agriculture minister, and even the minister in charge of stopping population decline. Now, you would think that the LDP would try to find someone different, a fresh face, perhaps Japan's first woman prime minister, which almost happened, by the way. Ishiba was in a runoff against Sane Takaichi, Japan's current economic security minister. The race went down to the wire, and Ishiba finally beat Takaichi with 215 votes to 194. Now, even though Ishiba does not scream anti-establishment, he was actually considered the outsider candidate. Ishiba has a number of enemies in his own party because of his outspokenness. Let me show you an example.
One might ask, what is an Asian version of the NATO military alliance? It is an obligation to help each other when it comes to collective security. In other words, while the strength of America relatively weakens, how to build a collective security mechanism becomes an issue.
You wouldn't expect a Japanese leader to publicly say that America is weakening or to suggest an Asian NATO, which is something that the US has categorically distanced itself from. But Ishiba is outspoken about both these things and other issues too. He was one of the few LDP members to criticize the current prime minister publicly. He also disagrees with his party on several issues. He wants to reduce nuclear power, allow female Japanese emperors, and let Japanese women keep their maiden names. And this sets him apart from a number of his colleagues, which is why he was considered an outsider. Apparently, he prefers reading books to making conversation with his fellow lawmakers. So you can imagine that he did not have much support from fellow MPs. He won the party leadership contest because of grassroots support. And now he wants to shake up the LDP. But that being said, Ishiba is still an old LDP hand, part of the same ruling establishment. Will his premiership really change how people see his party? Will the people of Japan really give him a chance? We'll find out in the months to come. For our last story tonight, let's talk about the land where time seems to stand still. The land with a relentless sun and rippling sand. I'm talking about the Sahara Desert. It spans across North Africa. It's the largest hot desert in the world, one of the driest regions on Earth, but maybe not so much anymore. The Sahara is blooming with life. NASA has released satellite images. They capture the desert's green shift, with plant life popping up everywhere, adding color to the typically arid land. Why is this happening? Is it a cause for celebration or a sign of devastation? Our next report tells you.
This is the Sahara Desert. It spans across North Africa with an area of more than 9 million square kilometers. It is the largest hot desert in the world. But for scientists, the Sahara is like a large open-air museum, where the shifting sands and the weathering bring up ancient landscapes from a bygone era. Did you know that thousands of years ago, the Sahara was nothing like it is today? It was home to lush greenery, packed with lakes and rivers, even forests. So the Sahara is an immense data bank. It can tell us what climate change can do to a region, how it can affect landscapes and civilizations, how it can turn a savanna brimming with life into one of the hottest and driest places on Earth. Because today, we are witnessing this shift once again. But this time, climate change is taking the Sahara back to its roots. NASA has released satellite images of the desert. They show a dramatic transformation. The Sahara is shifting green. You can see the influx of color from space. Over the past few months, the region has witnessed heavy rainfall, so plants are growing across the desert, especially in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia and Libya. These are generally treeless landscapes. They rarely receive any rain, but now green shoots are sprouting up across these regions. Now, considering the region's history, this is not completely unusual. The Sahara looks like a desert, but when a deluge of rain pours in, everything starts greening quickly. Plant life starts to sprout. Nature responds readily. What's unusual is the rate at which this is happening. The flora may look pretty, but this is a devastating sign of the things to come. Climate change is changing the tracks of storms. In Africa, it has moved the storm system northward, so rainfall in the region has become stronger and more frequent. Within a matter of days, North Africa received a year's worth of rainfall. So typically dry areas like Niger, Chad, Sudan, Libya and Egypt have received more than 400% of their typical rainfall since July. Now there is catastrophic flooding. About 4 million people have been severely impacted, and the Sahara Desert is about 6 times wetter than it should be. Meanwhile, because the storms have shifted, some countries that should be getting more rainfall, like Nigeria and Cameroon, are getting fewer rains. They received between 50 to 80% of their typical rainfall since July. Scientists say this is only the beginning. Climate change is disrupting seasons, making natural disasters worse and inviting major consequences. So while the Sahara looks fascinating with its newfound greenery, this is no cause for celebration.
Born in Karachi, studied at Oxford and leading a political party at 36. That's Bilawal Bhutto Zardari's resume. His mother was a prime minister and his father was president. So Bilawal had to fight his way to the top. But kudos to him, because he has never let his famous surname weigh him down. He's done that with his own speeches. You see, Bilawal's Urdu is a bit weak. He has said so himself. He's a lot more comfortable speaking English. But that has never stopped him from making complicated references. This time he was using the Urdu version of an English idiom. Give someone an inch and they'll take a mile. Safe to say, he got it wrong.
Hey y'all, come look at this.
बहुत वजन है आपकी बात पे और इस पे सोचना चाहिए कि when you आप कहते हैं ना आप उंगली देते हैं वो पूरा
बारिश आता है तो पानी आता है जब ज्यादा बारिश आता है तो ज्यादा पानी आता है
खान साहब ने तो पूरा टोचा खाना खाली कर दिया। टोचा खाना क्या है? मैं समझाऊं तो कैसे समझाऊं
कि टांगे कांपने में और कांपे टांगने में फर्क क्या है? हाँ।
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?